Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 164 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, Evelson, and joining me, we have my co-host, Namali.
Hello, hello.
And this week, well, there's a few things. We have a ton of interviews, both forward-looking, talking about augmentation, specifically, and also kind of some retrospective stuff. There's an interview that Max did talking with a couple people about things about Aberrus, about the gearing system, about the tuning, about weak auras. So we're going to be talking about interview stuff today. Also, we are both progressing Sarkareth.
Yeah,
How's that
kind of,
going? You made a face. You made a face.
kind of progressing. It is the middle of summertime here in the old
Yeah.
United States of America, where we raid, and yeah, we're getting hit pretty hard by just the vacation boss, I'll say in general. So
Yeah. Okay.
our progress is probably not where we generally want to be. Um,
Yeah.
and that's just because I don't think we've had this same, luckily healing wise, same healing comp. So like that hasn't been an issue, but like
Yeah.
we're on, I think, our third different tank comp.
Oh
Um
no.
yeah, we had and well, we'll say unexpected, but one of our tanks posted out like 3 months ago and never bumped like that they were out. And so was like, oh yeah, he isn't gonna be here today. So Thursday raid was interesting this week because it was a DPS going tank and then having to pull in one of our former raiders to fill in a DPS spot because we literally had exactly
Oh
20 with
no.
that person showing up. So yeah, it was so Thursday raid was, I mean, it was, to be fair, good. We made our best pulls, on Thursday, just in progression, but we're like 80, 90 pulls in and only really, like, to be fair, like maybe P2 is getting a little bit cleaner, but not
Yeah.
not anything, no progress in P3. So it's it's definitely a little bit of a rough boss. I feel like we as a guild, this is like a pretty common thing for us. We're like at least for the past, like, probably, honestly, I would probably say like four-ish tiers since really the start of Shadowlands, where like we get to the last boss and it's just like
The roster
a
boss is the
myriad
real
of
boss.
yeah, exactly. And it's funny because it's not roster boss, definitely, but it's not like people leaving. It's just like
Vacations.
compounding, like, real
Yeah.
life stuff like hitting at the
Yeah.
same time. So,
Um
but no, to be fair, I mean, I think spirits are still high. It's been rough with like the musical chairs of like key rolls and stuff like that. So
yeah, we I wish I could say it were different for us, and it's not as bad as it sounds like it is for you guys.
mhm.
But we have had, like, okay, on Friday. So we have a 5 healer roster. This
Mhm.
is a 4 heal boss, so that gives us some wiggle room already. One of our healers had a vacation starting today, so they were just out on the boss. Because we
Mhm.
we were like pretty sure we were still going to be working on it today, which, lo and behold, we are. And then one of our other healers posted out on Friday. Uh,
Oh, okay.
for unexpected IRL reasons. They are fine, but like unexpected IRL reasons. Um, so on Friday, we brought that guy in, and I spent like some time before raid like catching him up on things, and like that ended up not being a problem. Raid on the healing side went completely fine.
Nice.
Um, we just had 5 different people DC during the night.
Oh no.
And like most of them got back on within a couple of pulls, but we just had one guy that was like in and out, in and out, in and out, filling
Oh
spots. It was so
God.
bad.
Oh
Um,
man.
and so then because this guy, this other healer is out today for his vacation, he's been looking
Yeah.
forward to, and our other healer is not back yet. We have one of our DPS filling in the healing spot tonight. Um, and it's we did look a little bit at 3 healing as well. So
Mhm.
I might just for funsies,
Yeah.
air quotes, tonight, before raid, look at setting up a 3 heal CD plan, just in case we
Jesus.
have more disconnects, just in case.
Gosh, yeah, that'll be intense. I mean that yeah, the first phase is definitely the worst of it. Like even like with us, like in our progression, if we get to like the couple of attempts we had deep into P2 with like which means most of the raid makes it through, like the healing
Yeah.
requirement is like non-existent. So it's
Yeah,
all
Fate,
all
like,
P1 really.
it's all in can you survive the 2 clears in phase 1, basically? Can you
Yeah.
live through those 2 things? If you can, then you can easily 3 heal the rest of the fight.
Yeah.
As long as, like, there is basically a soften range at that point in phase 3, where the
Mhm.
damage does become untenable with 3 healers. But it's pretty deep, and if you're 3 healing, you have an extra DPS unless you're doing something stupid like 3 tanking.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so But I mean, we looked a little bit at it, and it was just like, okay, well, there are people that have done it, but not on Prog. They did it on Farm, and
Gotcha.
it's like, okay, so for those people, if they make it through phase 1 with everybody alive, they can probably just kill the boss.
Right, right.
Whereas for us, we need to make it through phase 1 with everybody alive just to continue progressing. Phase 3 basically is where we're at right now. We got kind of
Yeah.
stuck in phase 2. Phase 2 actually very hard on the tanks in terms of damage intake. Um,
Yes.
Yeah, I was a little bit unprepared for how hard I was going to get slammed at the end of the phase. Like the 340, 350 time frame, I get absolutely destroyed. And basically, if I don't have Fortifying Brew, I probably am dead.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
it's the first time we have assigned tank cooldowns, like or external. Sorry, not assigned tank cooldowns, but actual externals, like 4 tanks at certain points. First time we've
yeah.
actively discussed that versus like just them calling when they needed us using them.
We
So
have we have a couple of those now for phase 2. I do so like the first set of ads in phase 2 just dies because of the haste buff.
yeah,
Second set and third set, I am AoE taunting and tanking. Um, the AoE taunt helps paper over a little bit of just like people going nuts on the ads immediately when they spawn.
yep,
Makes it just a little bit more consistent because they all just follow me around. But it does mean that I am tanking, the 3 or 4 no glimmers. I think it's 3 no glimmers and the empty recollection and the boss at the same time. And
oh yeah,
you start taking that empty strike debuff, and things get spooky.
no, yeah, but I mean, I think in general, we'll hopefully this week is a little bit better. We got a couple people back. Um, But yeah, it's I don't know. I don't mind the fight. It's short. Like we've put in I think like those 90 pulls in 3 nights, right? So it's like you get a bunch of pulls in and I think I like that type of boss. But it's
Yeah,
just yeah, it sucks that we're not making as much progress I think we can. So
yeah, it is.
that's the downside.
It is a nice. It is a 7.5 minute fight. Like the
Yeah.
actual, there. It's technically not a hard enrage, but the boss starts pulsing like you take 20% more damage, stacking at
Yeah.
735.
Yeah.
So like past that point, you die very quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But
yeah,
yeah, hopefully, I mean, hopefully we get to see phase 3 this week. And yeah, I mean, for you, it sounds like you're trying to get through phase 3. So
fingers
yeah.
crossed. Like on Friday, we spent a lot of time in phase 2, and some of that is the tank stuff, which is very
Yeah.
frustrating for me because I try and be really prepared, and I just was like dying at this 340 mark just over and over and over.
Yeah.
And it really was like I was using cooldowns earlier to live through things safely that really I could probably live without a cooldown or use a smaller thing like an iron bark.
Yeah.
Like iron bark is not as good as fortifying brew. And so really needed to actually have fortifying brew at that point. It felt
Mhm.
like to really be safe or to stack other cooldowns or like you can probably do it with blessing of sacrifice because I learned this week the blessing of sacrifice is really 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 good for holy paladins,
Yeah.
like around 40% damage reduction for the duration as long as they don't get too low HP.
Yeah.
Kind of wild.
It's pretty okay. Pretty okay. Um, but cool. Yeah. I mean, hopefully we're talking, at least for next week, more into P3, and then for you, maybe it's close to a kill or a kill. So
Yeah, I mean, I have the changes to the boss. I have no concept really of like how much time phase 3 typically takes people. We're not
yeah.
doing we've decided that we are going to do the no down strat. The no down,
Okay.
do the second double dispel and then just like kill the boss, which has a fairly low DPS check, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have to survive that one pain point, um, where you do the double dispel because that does it just an absolute ton of damage.
Right. Yeah.
And people don't really do that, so I don't really like. The idea is it's mechanically simpler because you don't have to have the whole raid stacked on the one person. So the way the regular
Yeah.
strat works, for those that aren't familiar with it, is you have a cosmic ascension, that's the big blue or big purple circle that goes out, and when it finishes, rocks spawn. Those rocks are really bad. You don't want those rocks, because they pulse damage when you have to hide, and on Mythic that just like it does too much damage and you
Yeah.
don't. So on top of that, going down lets you clear your Oblivion stacks. So what the previous meta strat is, and maybe so the future meta strat, we'll have to see, is that before the third Cosmic Ascension, the whole raid except for one tank stacks on one person that finds a Moat of Oblivion, goes downstairs, and then comes back up. Like more or less exactly 19 seconds later, you have up to 20 seconds down there. You have like a 1 second window to come back up. It's
Yeah.
pretty tight. On top of like you have to be at 5+ stacks in order to go down on that moat. If you don't, you die to other people going down. There's no retry. You miss it,
Yeah.
you're hosed. You're dead. Um, and so like there's just like it's pretty technical versus like the one that we're doing, which is mostly gate out of the ascension and walk back and then just like DPS the boss. But then you have the double dispel, and that's the actual like hard thing. That's one of the things. They go down. The double dispel happens while everybody's downstairs. One goes on the tank. He clears it,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's good in theory.
In theory.
Other people have done this strat. We're not the first people to do it. All of them that I've seen are just like completely scuffed, two people alive at the end kind of kills. So I'm
Nice.
hoping that we're a little bit cleaner, but like we got to work through phase 3. We got to get through these issues, and hopefully, fingers crossed. Like there's always a slim chance we could just YOLO into a kill if we play really well tonight. We just spent all of
Right.
our time progressing phase 3. We could get a kill, but more realistically, it's happening next week.
Nice. Nice. Well, cool. Well, yeah, definitely good luck on that. So, um, yeah, we'll see. We'll definitely be talking more next week about that stuff. So,
Yeah.
so cool. So before we get into, I guess uh the um the interview bonanza that occurred this week, because the new patch is live on well, this reset, so either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, depending on your region. Um, there's a couple things that I wanted to touch on, just in general, that aren't actually, some of these are interview questions, but I think we can talk about them sort of outside of the context of the interview. So the first one was basically that in Ian's interview with, I believe it was Wowhead, he mentioned that they're going to change some of the looting starting in 10.15, or sorry, loot drop in 10.15, and essentially what's ending up happening is they're going to reduce the number of set pieces that drop in relation to other loot. And so the main reason I think there, and they sort of talk through about it, this idea is that we're halfway through, quote unquote, the season that they're calling this. The catalyst is available, and so having tier sets take up more than say two or more loot drop slots sort of lessens your ability to get other items that you can't catalyst
Yeah.
yourself into. Um, and so I think ultimately this is an interesting change. It's kind of the first time I feel like they've done like a blanket like loot drop change like this. And so
Yeah.
we'll see how this plays out, but we'll basically get less tier pieces, more other loot starting with your kills this week.
So the numbers are, if you look at the 20-player group size, aka Mythic or just like Heroic or normal with 20 people, instead of getting
Hmm.
2 tier items and 2 non-tier items, you get 3 non-tier items and 1 tier item. It's still 4 items, so it's not less loot. It's just that what you get fewer tier per boss kill.
Yep. Yeah, which is good. It sort of potentially means more of like the chase items or rare items or even just like trinkets, which we never see. Maybe we'll see more of them. We have more chances to see them, I guess we'll say,
Yeah.
coming up this week. So see, it's a good, I think this is a good change. I think this is something that like it's nice that they're thinking about making these type of changes. Like again, I think this is the theme of Dragonflight. It's like they are basically like looking across the board and like finding things to tune or change, where traditionally they would have probably left this in place, right?
Yeah.
Um, previously. So, um, but cool. So that's sort of the, I guess, the one thing I want to sort of to just break out in terms of new stuff. And then secondarily, just in terms of just, again, this is a 10.1.5 thing, but not really interview related. They did do another large tuning pass on the mega dungeon. What's the name? Dawn of the Infinite, right?
On the Infinite. Yeah.
Dawn of the Infinite. And it's various tweaks across pretty much every boss. Some bosses were nerfed, some bosses were buffed. But again, sort of a general tuning pass across the board for the mega dungeon. So it looks like they're trying to hone in on a specific difficulty, which I think we talked a little bit about this last week. It seems like, and even in their interviews this week, they mentioned this, is they're trying to aim a little bit higher in terms of difficulty for this content. But I mean, I think if you're in the 440s, you probably, well, it's new content, might be slightly difficult just based on it being new. You shouldn't have an issue with like healing, damage, tanking, stuff like that. It'll just be learning
Yeah.
the new mechanics. So in that perspective, so um, but cool. So that's it for the news before we sort of jump into all the interviews. And I wanted to start with sort of just a quick little recap on the changes that are coming in, particularly just around the classes. So Blizzard did their normal, hey, here's all the patch notes for the entire thing, and it's like extremely extensive. Like
Yeah.
there are it's hilarious if you look at, well, maybe not all other classes. Certain classes have like one bullet point, and you're like, like Demon Hunter has just this flat damage ability increase. It's their only bullet point for Demon Hunter on Vengeance. And then like you look at Mage or Druid or
Yeah.
Evoker and stuff like that, and it's like they wrote a novel in terms of the amount of changes. So, but in terms of Monk, there's really, well, I think you have the brand new. We spent
Right.
almost an entire episode talking about Press the Advantage, new talent, coming in next week, which is super cool.
So I want to briefly mention that got nerfed hard, right?
Okay,
That got nerfed really hard. So there's this text on the end now that things that it triggers that benefited from Tiger Palm trigger at reduced effectiveness. And so basically what that
gotcha.
means is your face palm that was, doubling Tiger Palm damage is not going to be doubling your Rising Sun Kick damage anymore. I think the current number is 10%,
Okay,
which Rising Sun Kick does like 4 or 5 times the damage of Tiger Palm. So, and there's other things that the talent does, like it gives you a stacking damage buff. So it's not like dead.
mm-hmm.
It's just no longer hilariously overpowered.
Gotcha, gotcha.
We are no longer going to be beating Windwalkers in single target DPS and taking their Wind Fury Totem spot. All this stuff. It is so. I think the last numbers that Kate had were that it is. I think the wording was just barely not competitive with Weapons of Order, which honestly, for like a thing that replaces 2 active abilities with something that now can be treated as fairly passive, that you are no longer just so heavily rewarded for stacking things up with Rising Sun Kick,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think is okay. We'll see where it ends up. I think it's okay for it to just be like, you can do 5% less DPS, but you can just have 2 fewer buttons and just like focus on
Yeah,
your core rotation, focus on your defense.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay, well, I mean, maybe good that they reined it in a little bit.
Yeah.
um, but I mean, yeah, and it sounds like they didn't overdo it, which is I think always the scary part when something is generally that good, right? Is
Yeah.
reining it in. So, um, cool. I guess in terms of well, Windwalker, we can talk quickly about Windwalker. They just got a flat damage increase, I think at 2%. So, whole little funny there. Not many changes. And then Mistweaver, minor changes at best. I think the only interesting change, which is something we've sort of talked about in a while is Font of Life. So Font of Life is a talent where part of it essentially increases the initial healing from Essence Font. It used to be a flat amount, so it was very
Mm,
good early,
and not
and
so good
essentially,
after.
yeah, not so great. What you got a little bit. Really, it was good before you hit the first raid tier, and then it was bad.
That
And it
seems
had always been,
bad.
yeah, it had always been an initial amount. Font of Life actually comes from the old, what's the BFA system?
Azurite.
Azurite gears. So it's an
Yeah.
Azurite power. And it made sense as a static amount that because it increased with like
Your
Azurite
gears
level
level.
or
Yeah,
gear. Yeah.
yeah.
But now it's just a 25% increase the initial heal. So it'll scale with your gear, just 25% harder. So solid change there. And a minor reduction in ancient teachings healing to or damage to healing conversion. Generally, that's because we got an overall damage buff across the board to Mistweaver. So
Yeah.
essentially, heals should stay relatively the same. It's just they've adjusted the conversion because you're doing more damage.
Yeah.
Um,
I do want to mention, like, we were talking about Sarkareth Prog, and like we're both looking at going into next week on our progression. There
mhm.
are reworks of all three mage specs. Holy Paladin rework.
Yeah.
Major Brewmaster changes, positive ones, but major. Did anybody else get a rework?
Not a rework, but I feel like wasn't oh no, Shadow was mostly just like their utility or healing stuff was
Right.
changed there.
They have a
Yeah.
long list, but it's all like mana values
Yeah.
changing because they're changing the base mana for hybrid specs.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I'm wondering I wonder I believe Affliction got some stuff or some of the Warlock specs as, the main character of World of Warcraft. I think they got some changes too across the board. And plus, I mean, we have Augmentation, which we'll talk a little bit more, but we have Augmentation Evoker coming in. So
yeah.
yeah, it's
Uh,
whew, it's crazy. It's crazy. Um, all the changes. So yeah, I wonder. Yeah, I have no idea how that's going to affect particularly our raid group. Mostly for the fact that like I feel like we have a different set of 20 people in every week, so it's like we don't get to pick and choose in a lot of cases. So we'll see how it goes.
yeah,
Um,
the Holy Paladin rework is the scariest thing for me. Like, if
yeah,
our mages find damage in different ways, it's fine. Um, Holy Paladin changes. Like right now, Holy Paladin basically doesn't have cooldowns to assign. You assign Aura Mastery,
yeah,
and that's like it. Like, if this changes it so that it's no longer just like constantly dumping out HPS, that not only changes our overall healing profile for the fight, but it also means that I'm gonna have to work on healing cooldowns again. Be like,
right,
okay,
exactly.
where do these go
Yeah,
now?
and I mean, I
So
think even playstyle wise, right? Like, there's a bunch of changes to just casting in general. So like a lot more flash of light, holy lights, which changes how the class plays, which sometimes translates, sometimes doesn't, like the individual player. So
right.
yeah, it's
Well, our current Holy Paladin is a former Disc Priest, so I think they'll be okay as a caster.
yeah, gotcha, gotcha. Um, yeah, and I'm wondering, yeah, so class wise, I think that's every like those are the major ones, which will be again, we'll see how it affects progression.
Yeah.
And then of
The
course, like, oh sorry,
I was gonna mention just the ring nerfs. Both
yeah,
the Aranog ring and the Onyx Analyte are getting nerfed. You're gonna have to just sim after the patch, and or you can actually go on Raidbots now, I believe, and use the PTR option to sim
yep,
what it'll be after the patch. Stuff like Brewmaster Sims is still very much work in progress. Kate is actively working on the APLs for that. Like, actually, like, huge shout out to them for putting in just a gargantuan amount of work on Brewmaster Sims
yeah,
this expansion. They have hard carried it. Like, Hina Lover does a lot of the implementation, like here's what the spell actually does, but then in terms of implementing the APL and figuring out what the rotation is, Kate has just like hard carried that. It's been nice because I have not touched it
yeah.
at all.
Nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. No, I think yeah, for even for healers, like the Onyx rings will be something you'd want to replace. So sooner rather than later. So yeah, that'll be good. A couple of, we've talked about a lot of this other stuff, like the new mythic upgrade track is going to be in, and that's retroactive. We mentioned that last week. So um all your mythic gear can go from 441 to 447. So an extra 6 item level, which is cool. Um they are opening cross realm trading of items and gold, which is big for like if you have a cross realm raid or you have characters you're pulling in from other servers that want to raid with you. So
This is
it'll make
also,
sales hugely easier, by the way.
yeah, this is also something that would have helped a lot with the legendary situation in Shadowlands. Like
Yeah.
obviously cross realm regional, like regional auction house for commodities helps a ton there, but still just like being able to trade with people on, like the legendary base items were not actually commodities, so they wouldn't have been affected, but like being
Right.
able to just like trade it good. I don't think this is cross realm trading, like what's it, crafting post thing yet. um
No.
but hopefully that's on their radar, and hopefully that as part of doing that they'll do something about all the people posting public orders with no materials and like 1 gold commission.
I hate that.
Like
I hate
nobody's
that
making your stupid item that costs
for free.
20,000 gold of materials for 1 gold just to get the point.
Yeah,
That's not
exactly.
happening.
Yeah, I saw. I've been trying to slowly level my enchanting on one of my alts. So I just do I have all the aspect
Yeah.
things. So like I've been checking that. Yeah, there's a bunch of times where I'm like, oh, like this guy 5 gold. I'll use that for the skill up, but they'll be like no materials. I'm like, I'm not. No,
Yeah,
this
I
is not
mean,
how this works.
my DK actually might have basically bricked inscription because I need 15 more skill points. Not knowledge points. Knowledge points I have tons of. Skill points to
Yeah.
unlock the final specialization. And the only way for me to get them is to craft stuff that costs sparks. But it's none of it's like trinkets and stuff that I can craft. And I can't
Yeah.
do it at high level because I'm skill level 60, right?
Oh my god, yeah.
So I need to like I'm probably going to just start taking sparks to just be able to like in 5 weeks I'll be able to craft 5 of these stupid trinkets, get 15 skill points, unlock the final thing, and finally move on. But it's
Yeah.
going to cost me like 5 sparks because of how the stupid profession works.
That's rough. Yeah. That's rough. That's rough. I'm trying to think. The only other reading through the notes, the only other well, not the only thing that caught my eye was they've added a skip to a raid. I feel like randomly, but they added a skip into Siege of Orgrimmar. So if you've killed Garrosh Hellscream, you can now. I think there's an item or a scroll you can click at the beginning of the instance that's basically ports you to the final boss. So if you haven't never done Siege of Orgrimmar before, it's a very like linear raid and takes absolutely forever. Tons of running around.
Yeah.
There's no, I don't think you can mount at all in it. So really good raid, by the way. It contains probably 2 of my favorite fights ever. And it used to be probably one of the fights I hated the most in Spoils of Pandora, but that has been taken over by a couple fights this tier. We'll say. But yeah, no, it's Siege was a really good raid. But now you can skip to the end. It just makes farming, particularly I think people want the mount and then the Garrosh shoulders drop from Garrosh, of course, in Siege.
Right.
So the plate shoulders for transmog. So that's a cool change. It's cool that they're going back to sort of help people do that because that raid is like at least 30 to 45 minutes of just, mostly just running. So
Yeah.
but definitely worth it. So well, cool. Anything else you wanted to bring up from just the patch notes in
No,
general?
I think now it's interview time. Just interview, 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 interview. Um,
Cool. Lovely.
so you want to start with? I think we start with the Max interview because that one
Okay.
is less like most of the other ones talk at length about augmentation evoker.
Yeah,
That's
that's
kind
fair.
of the big new thing. Whereas the Max one is more looking back at Aberrus and looking back at some of the things with that. So I was talking about this a little bit before the show. They spend quite a bit of time talking about gearing. And I think so. This interview is Max from Liquid interviewing Morgan Day and Michael Newthals, and I don't know. So Michael Newthals is leading counter designer, and then Morgan Day is of course Morgan Day, aka associate game director,
AKA best dev on the team. love Morgan.
So they do talk about like gearing and what that meant for raid tuning, and they did acknowledge actually that they underestimated how quickly the like people got eye level, and that did probably factor in multiple things, including how quickly the raid was cleared. Because so the actual I'm quoting from a quote. Uh, the week one average item levels were approximately equal to the week four of previous tiers for high end guilds like Liquid.
Yeah. Yeah, in this section, like while they talk about, so because I listened to the interview, and like why they talk while can't even speak, while they talk through this section, like that's basically the idea is that Max sort of mentioned like universally systems loved, like they're like at the high end, even at the low end, mid tier, like from Max's perspective, like streaming and talking to people in his community, right? Everybody loves it. And I think from even from my perspective, this is probably one of the best like I'll say like not catch up mechanics, but like basically power, like power creep, like
Yeah,
gearing things and like that. I think is really good. 'Cause typically, it's like a badge system. We had an upgrade system like a while ago with Valor upgrades, but you'd only get two things. You just collected Valor points however you wanted.
right.
But this is sort of like you do appropriate content to get an item that you then use to upgrade your gear that you may have gotten from that appropriate content. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, overall, I think that was sort of the sentiment of like great system, just literally too fast. Like you got the power increases too fast. And so like you mentioned, like Morgan mentions this and says that essentially like, yeah, we think we like the system, but we think it was too fast too soon. And he like it that
yeah,
presents additional problems around like typically and traditionally like gear nerfs fights. And if you are the same gear level you are in the middle of a tier
yeah.
and you get to the last boss and you can't kill it, you essentially are sitting around twiddling your thumbs until the designers or developers nerf that
Yeah.
fight, right?
And that's kind of like that was where Sepulcher was. Sepulcher was like tuned for you to have the best gear in order to kill the jailer. That's basically how
Yeah.
it was, and that's part of the reason that the raid got so many nerfs.
Yeah.
Um, this felt more like the raid was tuned around us being like 435 for a lot of bosses, for which we were 441. And
Yeah.
so it felt like we were already in those like late tier gear nerf kind of situations on week three.
Hmm.
Um, there's also like I think some of the issue here is like because aspect crests were functionally useless. Like you got as many aspect crests as you got whatever the next one down is, worm crests.
Yeah.
Um, but you only needed one aspect crest per item slot,
Yeah,
and
to upgrade it, yeah.
and so they were you really ran out of uses for them very quickly, and you could just downgrade them into extra worm crests and basically double your worm crest cap, and really gear very like scale up your gear very fast. But overall, like the system I think worked out really well. Like a lot of the complaints I hear about it now are just that we have a ton of aspect crests sitting around on our mains while our alts are over here like, you know,
Yeah.
when you're pugging low keys on your alt, you do very frequently just not time the key and get only 5 fragments, and then it's just like you. It takes like 2 hours to get a single crest between
Exactly.
all of the waiting for a group and all of the, everything. So that's I think the biggest thing is just like on alts getting crests feels just like super slow. But
Yeah.
that's maybe just like a reflection of how quickly we got crests on our mains. Like if you have a guild and you have the ability to just like farm these keys,
Oh yeah.
you just get so many so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that was our thing. I think like I'm not extremely hardcore. Like I don't play this game, tons of hours. But yeah, even by week 2, I essentially was out of things to upgrade. And all of my gear was either for like 440 or yeah. What's the highest 441 is the highest heroic one,
441
right?
is what you could go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like at that point, it's like, well, if someone like me who I'll do my 8 to 10, Mythic Plus dungeons to cap out Aspect Crest, right, for the first 2 weeks. But like after that, you're right. Like there was no reason for me to step back into, a 16 after that. So
Right. And this is also something that, like, jumping around a little bit, the Ian interview also talked a little bit about gear. And one of the things that he talked about was how the degree to which you could upgrade heroic gear felt like it devalued mythic gear, where
mhm.
you could get 441 from heroic by just upgrading it. Upgrading was very accessible, very easy to do. So then you go and you do mythic, Zara drops 441, Amalgamation drops 441, and Zakalia Assault
Yeah.
441. You don't hit the next tier of items actually until, is it? I guess you hit 444 from Forgotten Experiments in Rashok,
Yeah, and
and
Karn, yeah.
that's only 3 item levels over what you can get your heroic gear.
Right. Yeah, so the power gain is extremely minor, right? Like
Yeah,
from heroic in there, yeah.
and so like one of the things that Ian talked about is how it felt like the ease with which you could upgrade that heroic gear into basically mythic eye level devalued the mythic gear. And so one of the things they're doing, and I'm curious how they'll evolve this, but one of the things they're doing in 10.15, like we mentioned earlier, is there's the ability to upgrade your mythic gear even further. So now instead of it being 441, 444, it goes to 447. So you can get
Hmm.
like, now it's going to be 6 eye levels better for your Rashox. Still
Right.
not like a huge jump, but it's something.
Right. Yeah, so we'll see how that plays out. I mean, yeah, I think like in general, I think the sentiment's always going to be this is probably one of the best upgrade like progression type systems they've had in a while. So they just need to tune it. I think like not make any major changes, like tune acquisition, tune how many of these things you can get in a week,
Yeah.
to basically generally slow the gearing process up.
I do
Um,
think, like, thinking back a little bit about how we talked about this system before it went live and how complicated it is. I think the complexity was warranted because if I think back through our experience with the system,
yeah,
just the number of bad feels of just like don't know what's going on and like did something wrong and now you just lost a resource basically forever is just very low, right? Like in
yeah,
contrast with like the crafting system where people accidentally crafted the wrong item with a spark, right?
yeah.
Which happened way more often and could really set you back. Like I actually did that on my mage recently. I didn't realize I was wearing one of the crafted rings, and those are unique equipped. Even though there's, why are there 2 separate unique rings that you can
Yeah,
craft?
I don't know.
I don't.
Yeah.
What is this? Anyway, I crafted the same one twice, and support will not help you. Your
Yeah.
host. The only thing they'll do is if you have crafted something that is literally unusable for your class, I believe that they will help you with that because we had some people in 10.0 that like
Hmm.
they crafted the strength sword instead of the int sword or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And got some help with that. But if it's just like, you just crafted another ring, great. Like that was just very frustrating. And it's so easy to do that compared with like this system. It's so hard. You have to be like actively trying to do something that is just really bad,
Oh yeah.
and very costly for you. Yeah, like I think probably the extent of it was like a couple people made multiple enchanted aspect crests in the first week and then weren't
Hmm.
able to finish upgrading their gear and had to wait until the
Yeah.
next week. But it wasn't even like it just meant that they had to wait until the next week, right? It wasn't like they lost something because they did use those enchanted aspect crests.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
It just meant that the order of operations is a little bit backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know how much more we can say about the system,
Yeah,
at least in terms of like that we haven't already. But no, I think it turned out really well. I just in general, from what Morgan has sort of hinted at, is they just want to sort of slow it down a little bit, which
yeah,
seems like it's a potentially like easier fix there.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so then, oh sorry,
Go ahead. I was doing
I was
the
gonna move.
move on as well.
I was gonna do weak ores. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was gonna
yeah.
do weak ores
Same.
basically. Yeah. Yeah. So Max basically asked the question around like how they felt the private weak auras sort of or sorry, private auras turned out in terms of their impact, on weak auras. And I think you and I talked about this when it first came out. And the idea was essentially weak auras today extremely complex and can essentially run the game for you. Like if you get a debuff or 3 people get a debuff, it can tell you like how to clear, what number to clear, potentially where to run to,
Yeah.
if you have predetermined locations, all that fun stuff. So they tested private auras essentially on 2 main bosses. So the bleed effect from the first boss on Forgotten Experiments, that charge it does that you can't sort of denote who has it or put point like people can't tell what it or you can't from a weak aura tell people where to go based on that. It's a simple mechanics. You can sort of figure it out your own.
Right.
And then the other one was the main one that this comes up is on the volcanic hearts on Neltharis, um, which is essentially the idea of those 5 things that come out, and you have to sort of spread out away from people. Um,
The other place this is on Neltharion. The oh, I'm blanking on the name of it. The knockbacks that people get, the purple lines that they get.
yeah.
That's technically a private aura, but one of the other things we saw there is basically a side channel attack is what it's called. And like when you're talking about security, there was
Hmm.
another thing you could look at that wasn't the debuff to figure out who is getting the debuff, and then you could use that for your weak aura, which is how there's an assignment thing that both bigwigs and there's a weak aura for it
Yeah.
that will assign a person to break a wall with that mechanic, and the other two are assigned to not break a wall. So even though it's a private aura, there is a way to do assignment for it.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. But yeah, so I mean, they talked a little bit about this and the idea of, the main reason they moved to this and they're going to continue to use this is essentially to get people to look at the game. It's kind of like the way that the lead accountant designer Michael sort of described it, is the idea of like not just staring at a bunch of weak auras or like seeing a triangle pop up on your screen and then you run to the triangle, right? There's like
Right.
looking at the world around you as you're playing the game. So I mean, I think to be fair, to accomplish that, they talked a little bit about the list weak aura, which is sort of what people typically use today. It's just a list of all the raid members. And if you have the debuff, you count what number you are, and then based on that number, you run to a specific spot or
Yeah.
through an area. Um, and yeah, so I mean, they talked a little bit about that, and they're okay with that. They didn't seem like they're going to do anything to sort of break that functionality. They were not okay with the map weak aura though. They mentioned that like in like I think Morgan mentioned basically the thing of like, yeah, we're okay with like the list, but that map we might have to do something about. um
That okay, so this is like Neltharion is a great like they did not pull back far enough on these things to work without. They
yeah.
just didn't. Um, the volcanic heart was too big on Mythic, came out too fast and too frequently. Like one of those things needed to change.
Mhm.
Potentially multiple of those things needed to change in order for that to be a mechanic that you could realistically do, and also the visibility of it, like seeing who has it, being able to more easily be like, okay, I see there's this big pillar of fire over there that I know somebody is going to that corner.
Right.
Might have been helpful as well. Um, or doing things like maybe the game gave people, it's like everybody there's you get 5 hearts and 2 of them are red and 2 of them are yellow, and like one of them that can help you,
Yeah.
like the yellow ones go here and the orange ones go here, and then you can play it without the weak aura. But like that mechanic just did not have, like they needed to pull back harder. The other like you mentioned, the forgotten experiments one felt fine, and I 100%
Yeah.
agree. You had a lot more time, the mechanic was not as
Oh yeah.
punishing, like it was fine. um and the the knock one on Neltharion, I think actually would have been fine without a weak aura. It's
Yeah.
just that it happened to be that the way it worked is the boss actually targets each person in sequence going to put it on.
Yeah.
So you could just look at that and see, oh, the boss targeted A, B, C. Okay, A, you're breaking the wall. B and C, get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
So yeah. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I think that one would have been fine without a weak aura. But
Mhm.
Volcanic Heart, just no way. Just no way.
Yeah. No, it was definitely it was yeah, with the range nerf, I think it made it slightly easier with the fight like the range nerf they did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Made it manageable, but yeah, it was interesting. Um but yeah, so that's on the sort of the weak aura stuff. One thing that Morgan did sort of probably leak, or I don't know if it's a leak,
I
but
don't
talked
think
about,
he technically, yeah, like technically it's not a leak because he's allowed to
yeah.
say
Yeah, but it's sort of a little
it.
bit of spoiler. The first time anyone's hearing about it, but coming in 10.1.7, they're actually adding like a ping system, or I guess they're calling it contextual ping system, which they likened it to like the Dota 2 or League of Legends pinging. If you're not familiar with those with MOBAs, like you essentially can hit I think it's Alt plus left click in Dota, and you can ping a location basically
Yeah.
on the map, and it shows up for every other player, well, every other player on your team in that game. And they, I think Dota and both League have contextual pings too, where you can basically ping like danger here, or like you can ping like attack here, or like
Yeah.
defend here, depending on what you want to do. And this is very similar. Like if you played any sort of the battle royales, like Fortnite and Modern Warfare, they also have similar ping systems in a first person shooter type idea.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're adding essentially a ping system to WoW, which is actually really cool. The idea of being able to like ping locations where people go, and like, or like ping that you're taking this spot so that way people stay away from it. I will tell you, like, that's been on the start of any fight. Like, so I think Volcanic Heart's a good example of this, but you can think about any fight where you have to move to a certain position as an individual, and it might not be fully assigned every time you go there.
Yeah.
Um, and there might be like multiples you have to pick. And so like I know that like for Volcanic Heart in some cases we had a pretty bad string of about 15 attempts where we would die or we would kill people in a certain position because like the Volcanic Hearts wouldn't communicate. And so
Yeah.
they'd stack on top of each other, or someone would be like in a position they shouldn't be. And so like that meant another person was out of position, and like just it became chaos. And so
Yeah.
a ping system like this would be interesting.
I've seen
Be
a few
cool.
people going like, I don't see the point of this. Like, we could already put world markers out, and that's basically a ping. Two things. First off, these are ephemeral. They're not gonna like linger around, but they also
Yep.
don't conflict. Like, there's a lot of fights where we use all of the world markers.
Yeah. Neltharion, the
Yeah.
example where I think we used every one of them. So
Yeah. And in those scenarios, like, it's a real pain. Like, you do a pull and maybe you use a world marker as a like contextual thing where it's like, oh, I need you to go here. I need you to go to square. And we move square, and then we forget to move it back, and then we wipe because square is not in the place it's supposed to be. Um, and that's like a point of frustration. But also, being able to potentially have a lot of people do this. Like, you couldn't, like, let's say Volcanic Heart, you had more time,
mhm.
and you had time for people to be able to like, okay, everybody just like ping the spot you're going to. Like, Volcanic Heart would need to last a little bit longer for that to work. But hypothetically, if it did, you could do that. And you can't have like five of your over half of your world markers dedicated to that, along
Oh
with
yeah.
like everybody would have to use a different world marker, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and that's also not practical. Or four of your world markers, four hearts, but still, it's like, is it four? It's five. It's just like there. This does add things. This is adding
Yeah.
things that are hard to do. Like, some of it you can do with world markers. A lot of it is very difficult to do with world markers.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think yeah, the contextual nature of it, I think will be interesting too, particularly depending on what they do about like, is this an attack? Like again, similar if we sort of take Dota 2 as an example, like, is this like a move thing where I'm going to move here? Is this like a danger area where like you want to
Yeah,
stay away from it? So we'll see how they actually implement this. And if I'll be completely honest with you, the one thing that sort of concerns me is that like if you can limit who can ping in a group, uh,
yeah.
that would be something that I think would be helpful in my raid because I know that people will troll at least a
I
couple times a night.
like. I want our raid. I don't want to have to give the whole raid assist in order to let them use pings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't want it to be like only raid assists can use pings. That just kind of defeats the point, honestly, for me.
Yeah.
Like, it would be useful, but it would be way less useful. But I do like, there's got to be some kind of like rate limiting, and also a way to just be like, I'm ignoring pings from this person. It's like,
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
in pugs where people like uh just like spam yell, or worse, they've got assist for whatever reason, and they just spam raidborn, and oh my god, like,
Yeah.
I'm
We
just glad I have slash ignore.
yeah. Yeah, we always get the fun, like, depending if someone new gets assist and, like, they have, like, their raid markers turned on. So, like, we have a weak or that assigns something, and then it gets overwritten by, like,
The raid
the
markers,
bigwigs or DBM, and
yeah,
you're like, "Well, where do I go? I was triangle." And they're like, "No, I mean, the weak or said you were square, but then someone
yeah,
with assist has it, and, yeah, lose attempts to that." So, yeah.
yeah,
No, I mean, but it'll be cool. I'm excited. I think this is sort of how to use it. I mean, if we even end up using it, but I think the ping stuff is cool.
yeah,
Um, so hopefully, I mean, again, this then like to talking about like WeakOr's playing the game for you. like adding a ping and saying like for Volcanic Heart where we would have issues and like being able to ping like I'm going there, like, and that way people stay away is like a cool
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah. Um,
um
yeah. I mean, I am essentially excited about that. I do think that in general, like my take is they need to pull back harder on mechanics that they are making private. Like if it's private, it needs to be less punishing, less time sensitive, something
mhm,
than what Volcanic Heart was.
yeah.
Yeah. Let's like hop over to some of the augmentation evoker stuff. A bunch of the interviews, not Max's, a bunch of the interviews though did talk about augmentation evoker,
Mhm.
and just various different aspects of it. Some of the like highlights of it. There was a question about like, are we go? A couple of actually related ones. Are we going to see? So there's combat log hooks to help evaluating like augmentation evoker damage that show up in Warcraft logs. Um,
Mhm.
there was a question that was asked in Wowhead's interview, like, are we going to see these for something like Power Infusion or Wind Fury Totem or Chaos Brand? And the answer to that is basically no.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, like Power Infusion is a technical one. Chaos Brand is like what happens if you have two Demon Hunters there. But then also the kind of idea is that those are smaller. You know, you can look at the Demon Hunter's damage, and you don't need to know the 5% that Chaos Brand brought to kind of get a sense that they are doing good or not doing good or are valuable
Right.
or not valuable. Whereas like Augmentation Evoker, if you couldn't see the actual damage done, damage contributed by Augmentation Evoker, you'd be looking at the spec doing like tank DPS if that, and just be like, is it good? I don't know. Let's just not play it because it might be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, the other thing is like they sort of call like Chaos Brand or Mystic Touch, right? Like perks of playing the class. They're just like, hey, we're here. You automatically get it. It's not sort of added into like your own expected damage. Like they're not
Yeah,
buffing Demon Hunter because they bring this 5%. It's just a like a flavor thing, a nice to have.
yeah,
Um yeah, similarly too is like the Graham interview. So there was two interviews that really talked about evokers, but the one for Warcraft that Warcraft Logs did with Graham, one of the senior game designers, talked more about in terms of like opting into the play style and
yeah,
being able to have that sort of like feedback in terms of okay, how well am I doing, right? Like because you can't just look at like you mentioned, you can't just look at the damage done by you as an augmentation evoker and sort of get a true picture of like how well are you doing.
yeah,
And then also they talked a little bit about this in the context of like some of the initial design work they were doing had augmentation evokers buffing haste for classes. But what they found they ran into is number one, like, well, they started with haste because it's very impactful. Like, if you have
it
20% haste
feels
versus
good.
zero, it feels better. But they found that like it's also a very complex stat to attribute damage to, which is why
Yeah,
things like PI are so difficult to like, or even heroism, like in some cases, like to attribute like, all right, what is the impact or like the buff that you get? Because like, you know, hots will tick faster, like dots will tick faster. You'll be able to get more casts off and like
yeah,
things like that. So like what percentage of a cast now that you cast it faster gets attributed to augmentation evoker versus not.
yeah,
And so it's like it becomes a little bit more of a difficult conversation. So so yeah, so not gonna see that type of like additional like feedback and logs to say like, okay, PI is like 10% of the raid
yeah.
damage. Let's add that to the priest, right? So
Yeah, there's also, so they talked a little bit about like they were concerned about having too many haste buffs, like where
yeah.
the point where having that level of haste becomes normal and then it's no longer special, and instead of it being feels good when you have PI for like 10 seconds, it now just feels bad for the like 20% of the time you are missing the haste buff from the augmentation evoker.
Hmm.
And then it's like playing with that level of haste becomes normal, and so it kind of flips on its head the like whether haste feels good or feels bad. Like haste, I guess,
Yeah.
always feels good, but then it's like instead of it being ooh exciting, I have PI, it's like God, I don't have the haste that I'm used to. It feels really bad. Like the thing that you hear casters complain about at the start of every single expansion when they're walking into a
Yeah.
new raid with like 8% haste.
It just feels slow. Yeah. It just feels slow.
Um, yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I mean that. Oh, sorry.
yeah, that's yeah. I was
Gotcha.
gonna get a little bit into the related one of like, are they going to expand this kind of support spec concept into other existing specs? And you kind of mentioned this where like enhancement shaman maybe back in classic were the support specs. I think we talked about this a little bit last week.
Yeah.
Were kind of a support spec. Now, for the past like 10 years, if you played enhancement shaman, you were expecting to like be a damage dealer, to do damage yourself. And in a kind of a real sense, Wind Fury Totem is a perk. It's a thing that you
Yeah.
bring that's a cool thing, it's group utility, valuable, but it's a perk. Not having it is fine. Having it is a nice bonus. And the enhancement shaman, even if you don't have other classes that are good with Wind Fury Totem, enhancement shaman is still good.
Exactly.
Well, some of the
Yeah.
time.
So yeah, well, depending on tuning. But yeah, so I think Graham sort of went through this, and I don't know if Ian mentioned it, but the idea would be is like they probably like number one, they're going to see how Augmentation Evoker goes. This is also why Augmentation Evoker wasn't in at launch, was that there was too many other changes that they did want to have to focus on balancing something along with balancing the talents across every other class, right? And just
Right.
Invoker in general.
Yeah.
So augmentation was always something they knew they wanted to do, but it sort of was delayed slightly because of this. And then yeah, they also mentioned that from a support class or spec perspective, they'll see how augmentation goes. And if it's good, if the community is well received, if they think it's a good fit for the way the game plays, then they'll explore essentially adding it in as additional specs to something. The nice part about augmentation is it's not something you have to do. You opt into being it. I think I mentioned
Right.
that like earlier. It's like you have to select this spec, and you know what you're getting into in terms of like
Yeah.
I'm going to do less damage so that my friends can do more damage or my raid can do more
Yeah.
damage.
I also
Um,
suspect that they're a little bit wary of a rehash of the survival hunter situation in WAD, where basically the answer was a gigantic foot and mouth. We don't want you to play survival because we don't want you to be attached to it because we're going to change it.
yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's bad so that you don't play it, so you don't feel as bad when we change it after. And like that
Yeah,
was a very, very unpopular answer. I would go as far as to say it was a not good answer. So I think they may be a little bit wary of that, like of taking a spec like enhancement shaman
yeah.
or
Even I've heard even disc priest like mentioned
yeah.
as like an idea of like going down this route. Yeah,
And like just like people are attached to those. They have been good, they are good. I mean, Disc Priest
right.
is currently playing second fiddle to Holy Priest, but Disc Priest was good last year.
Yeah, traditionally disc priest has been the better of the two healing specs there. Yeah, so I mean, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm excited. I like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I've gotten Evoker up to appropriate item level to start doing some mythic. So we'll see how it plays as an augmentation once we get through Prog. So I guess there's only one fine. I guess there's two things, maybe quick hits, and then I know we're hitting time here. Ian did bring up in his interview about rogue reworks, which I don't really want to talk about the actual rogue rework, but more about the idea that because the way their content patches and their content cycle lines up, they have some pretty rigid dates to hit. Things are going to be announced and then moved. And I think like Ian basically goes into the fact that like, look, we can not say anything, and then we go back to the way it previously was, where every couple months you get a dump of here's what we specifically can make it into a patch, or we go into a roadmap and there are going to be pieces of this roadmap that don't get in, right?
Yeah.
That miss their dates. And so essentially the idea is like he acknowledged the frustration from rogue players who were expecting a rework in 10.1.5, but basically said, look, we just didn't have the time.
Yeah.
It's on our thing. We're going to try, and I think 10.1.7. I don't know if he says that specifically,
Yeah.
but um,
He also alluded to like he didn't specifically say, but he mentioned like things can happen like the person that was working on it, like,
it's
not
sick.
getting sick,
Yeah,
having IRL stuff that they had to deal with. So I don't like he just that example kind of stood out to me as like, that maybe is hinting that that is actually what happened. But the other thing that he said about that is we could have somebody else that is not as intimately familiar with the spec work on it. But if we're gonna rework it, does that make sense to have somebody that's
right.
not as familiar? Isn't that just setting ourselves up to like having to rework it a second time a couple
Yeah,
years from now?
yeah. Just do we make changes just to make changes because we said we would, or do we do it the right way? And like have the community trust us to say like we are going
Yeah.
to rework this. We're looking at it. It's just not going to make the original patch we said.
It is
So
interesting to contrast this approach to the infamous Shaman rework. I think like Enhancement Shaman in early BFA was basically promised to rework in
never came.
8.1 that never came, and there was just radio silence about it, and it just never happened.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there was a basically a promised rogue rework that has not happened, but instead of being just radio silent about it, there is the acknowledgement of like, hey, this rogue rework, where is it? It's not in 10.15. And the
Yeah.
answer just basically being, it will be coming. It just,
Just
it was not ready.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's a function of, I mean, that's just they're doing more patching, right? So they have the ability to
Yeah.
push things because in their roadmap, they have another spot to put it versus
Yeah.
previously, if they missed a patch time, it was
It was
6
waiting
months
6
before the next
months
patch.
because their
Yeah.
patches were insanely far apart. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the one thing which I think is good. I think it's just people in the community to do two things: be understanding that schedules change and trust that Blizzard's going to do what they do, which they don't have the best track record, but I'd say in Dragonflight they're doing a lot better in that regard. And the other thing, final thing I think from me is that in the Max interview, they did talk a little bit about fight length, which is I think is an interesting thing in this tier
Yeah.
where like, we talked earlier, Sarkareth is a 7.5 minute fight, which in terms of end bosses is a far cry from the 14-minute Sylvanas fight that we had, right?
Right. It's literally
Um,
half the length.
yeah, exactly. And so what Morgan, and I don't know if Morgan or Michael actually responded to this. I think it was Michael actually, the leading counter designer, is the idea that like they want to hit shorter fights in general. They basically want the idea that like you start a fight and you are just go, go, go until the end. And the thing is with a fight like Sylvanas is that they can't do that because it's too long. They need break periods in the fight.
Yeah.
And what
And
happens
those
is
break periods make it even longer.
exactly. And the idea too is that the difficulty then isn't the mechanics you're doing, it's paying attention. Like it's the paying attention for the 14 minutes, like putting together a solid 14 minutes
Yeah.
of play versus they can make a 7.5 minute fight, make it hard, make it come at you, keep coming at you.
Yeah.
And like that, the difficulty is in executing that sort of speed thing. So
Yeah.
which is cool. So I think they sort of mentioned that. And the other thing is like if they ever get back to, well, 7:30 isn't their benchmark. I think they said like generally like 10 minutes would be like the high end. They want like end boss to hit like 8 to 10 minute range.
Denathrius, for
Yeah.
reference, was a 10-minute fight.
Beautiful
Denathrius
fight.
was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. And then I think Morgan mentioned like if we ever get back into like the 15-ish minute fight, like that's a candidate to basically be two fights. And he gave the Carapace and N'Zoth example because originally Carapace and N'Zoth were one fight.
And that would have been a
Um,
20-minute long monstrosity.
Shah of Fear, like like hurting myself from MOP. 20-minute
Yeah.
fight there. So,
Yeah.
but no, I think that was it. I think generally a good change. I think I'm a much bigger fan of the 7.5 minute fight because if you mess up in P2, you're only losing half the time versus
Yeah.
Sylvanas. If someone walked off the side in like
Y-
P2, you're
Yeah.
just like, God damn it. Like,
We have
great.
another 5 minutes to go. We can't do this without the extra person, right?
Yeah, or someone misses a jump in P3, like goes to the wrong platform. You're like, great, we just wasted, 9 minutes of
Yeah. Yeah.
time like doing this. So yeah.
Also, just like one quick note before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Is this the first confirmation that we've gotten that Carapace of N'Zoth and N'Zoth were supposed to be one fight?
I think so. I think maybe Ian might have mentioned something earlier, but I think it's the
First direct
the
confirmation.
best evidence, like the best
Yeah.
evidence we have. Yeah, from
Yeah.
I think Morgan mentioned that. So
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. I just that was always like a. We think that like it's kind of. It seems like it should
like
be
optically, it made sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
You start outside, go in. So yeah.
Yeah. Um. Cool.
But I think that's a lot. I think we probably missed a couple of things interview wise, but
Yeah, there's a bunch of
um,
technical stuff that we could talk about with augmentation evokers. Zephyrus did the Warcraft Logs interview. This is the first time Warcraft Logs has had an interview like this, and it made sense with how much stuff is like the
mhm.
combat log hooks for evokers are a big thing for Warcraft Logs. The big thing like community is going to be used through that. Like that is an interesting read if you are interested in some slightly more technical questions.
Mhm.
Including a question that they were not prepared for about like performance implications of having a
Yeah.
ton of additional events. This is actually something that I don't like. Gramberger didn't know the answer to this. I am
Yeah.
curious if one of the reasons that on the engineering side they did not have these combat log events visible in game is that it functionally doubles the number of
Yeah.
events that you get for a lot of specs, because for every spec in addition that is buffed by the augmentation evoker, in addition to getting their damage event, you also get a support event. And
Yeah.
there are already things like we had a healer last year that basically fixed their performance problems on Kurog by turning off in Voodoo the combat log update thing.
That's hilarious.
And that just they were getting like freezes every time the dot tick.
Oh wow.
Just like not like hard like 2 second long freezes, but just like in that moment it would freeze for half a second.
Like hiccups, yeah.
Yeah, and that just like
Yeah.
is, even if it doesn't literally kill you, that's, I wouldn't want to play like that.
Oh yeah, no.
But yeah, so I am curious if eventually that does come out to be part of the reason that that's not there. But yeah,
Okay, we'll see.
that is going to be it for the show today. 10.15 comes out on, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Very
So
exciting.
excited.
And we'll be back next week to talk about Sarkareth in the new world. Maybe.
Yeah, all those
Hopefully.
changes. Maybe a dead Sarkareth for you. Maybe a consistent raid group for me.
Yeah. Also, probably Brewmaster stuff, because things will finally, maybe, hopefully be settled. But yeah,
Nice.
that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.